Welcome to the Secrets to Winning podcast with Dr. Brett McKay. This week's episode starts right now.
Hey, welcome back to the Secrets to Winning podcast. Dr. Brett McKay, and I'm joined by a very impactful guy. I saw him at the 2020 American Baseball Coaches Association meeting. And doing my job, I go and I'll listen to a lot of talks, and I'll listen to a lot of things. But then there's people who are speaking to you, and they're sharing you their story, and you can hear what the lesson is. And when you walk into a room and you know that you can hear a pin drop, and then you see the emotion that people pull into, today's guest is that guy. And it's John OLeary. And John, as a 9-year-old young boy, he was burned on over 100% of his body, not given a big chance of survival. But here we are with him today. And so what I want to talk to John about, and I'm going to clue you in on this conversation, is about how things happen to us and how we can learn to pivot our mindset and not feel imprisoned or restricted from being able to live the life that we want to live. We just may have to live it the way that we now have to live it. So John, welcome to the podcast.
Dr. Brett McCabe, it's a pleasure to be with you. And what an awesome introduction, man. So thank you. And thanks for allowing me to join a friend today.
Absolutely. So your story is, you wouldn't want to wish that on anybody. I know that. But what was how did you do it? How did you continually find, I don't want to say a silver lining because that minimizes it, but how did you always balance your choices between seeing things as opportunities, probably experiencing times of frustration, anger, maybe some self-pity, maybe some disappointment, but always cycling back?
Right. So let's go through that in 3 different time blocks. The first will be like the day of the fire, second during the recovery, and third this morning. Because it's not like you ever retire from being a burn survivor. It's something you carry literally with you every step along the way. So I still have scars on 90% of my body. I'm still missing my fingers on both hands. My life is still very difficult in some ways physically. So we'll end with that one because it's a daily journey. But it began on that first day when I was burned. I'm in the hospital room. On that day, burns to 100% of my body, 90% were 3rd degree. It is, like you said in the intro, a total death sentence. And man, I want out, I think, because it's just too hard. I'm too challenged. I think my mom and dad are going to be furious with what I did, not only with my body, but with our house, because I caused the fire by accident. So I'm sure that they're going to be done with me. My dad walks in with love and grace, which blew me away. But then my mom walks in, and this is the first one. My mom walks in, she takes my hand, pats my bald head. All the hair had been, burned off. And she takes my right hand in hers and says these words: "Baby, I love you. I love you." So I'm lost when she says that, because that is not at all what I expected from her that day. So I look up and I say, "Mama, knock it off with the love. Am I going to die?" And her response was, "Do you want to? It's your choice, John." You and I were talking about the choice right before you and I started the recording. It's your choice. It's not mine. And Brett, I thought she was going to let me know that it was going to be easy and that I would get out of there that afternoon. But what she distilled it ultimately down to is, it is your choice. So I said to her, "Mama, I don't want to die. I want to live." Yeah. And her response back, as we summarize this first story, is, "Good. Then take the hand of God. You walk the journey with him. Your Father and I will be with you every step along this journey. You are not alone. But John, you got to fight. You got to own your piece of it." So the first choice I made to really control the mindset was to determine where I wanted this thing to end up. And on day one, it was, I don't want to end up dead. I don't want to end up dead. And I think for some of us listening right now, that's a very good choice to begin with, actually. Whether that means dead in a relationship, dead professionally, dead spiritually,
dead inside.
Mentally.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, and many of us,
yeah,
man, if you become too cynical, where our marketplace is shifting to, where cynicism leads to is indifference, where indifference leads to is death.
Yeah,
and that might sound dramatic, man, but it's true in a football team. It's true in a marriage. It's true in a nation. Once you become more indifferent, ultimately you cross your arms and you stop breathing. So the first choice I made was to live.
And before you go into the second choice, what I want our listeners to understand is burn victims, it can be a delayed death because there's a moment when your endorphins in the body are surging. that the person who's gone through the burn is okay. But you got to remember the largest organ we have in our body is our skin. And that skin is now exposed to infection. It's in tremendous pain. The nerve endings get raw. It is a brutal course of therapy. And so many times you'll see people coming into an emergency room with burns, and their treacherous path is coming. It's not right then. It's not like being shot. Imagine being shot and then there's a time bomb inside you. So you had to your fight was just getting started.
Correct. In some regards, even leaving 5.5 months after coming in, it was just getting started, because then you got to learn how to do everything. But the first 5.5 months in hospital, I think that's the next big time chunk. It wasn't so much about not dying. At that point, it was about recovering. And the goal we had, I'm a big goals guy. I know you are as well. Our goal as a family was to get this boy out of here. What my father did during the very difficult days of surgery and therapy and bandage changes, and they're drawing blood from the only exposed part of my entire body. This is true. They drew it from the toes, like every single morning, man, and all day long. This little boy's life was chaotic, somewhat out of control, and extraordinarily difficult. So what gets you through that? For us, it was faith. It was people coming by and visiting and encouraging and loving. It was people writing letters of encouragement, reminding us that we were not alone, but also directionally having a North Star. And for us, the North Star was May 26th. It was a day we circled on the calendar back on January 17th. And every single day, my father would come into the room. He would rip off whatever day it was on the calendar. And then he would count loudly out how many days we had left. And when we started this, there were maybe 136 days. But when he came in the following day, there were 135 and then 134. And we were racing toward that date in May. Eventually, we actually moved past that day. We weren't able to go home on the day we intended to. But having that goal to guide me, my parents, my siblings, and our community that loved us and were struggling with us forward with this common zeal toward recovery, like that was a really important thing to have as we went through this very difficult time.
Can't imagine. You were talking about being dead inside, being dead to whatever, and we have to make that choice. And like you said, not to be over dramatic, but it is that important that we choose to live. We have to choose to live life, not let life live us, right? We have to choose. And I talk to athletes who, and since this is predominantly a coaching and athletic podcast, is people will say, I just feel so beaten down by the game. Yeah. I just feel so exhausted. Was it ever going to change? And those choices, when there's no light at the end of the tunnel, like when you're 136 days away, what's your light?
Right.
That's tough.
For us, and I think there's an athletic parallel here. Not only the goal. So for many of your athletes or coaches listening, it might be that trophy. It might be that win-loss record. It might be ultimately success at the next level. That might be it. So you got to have that in mind. That also must be tethered to the day, which is today. It's not yesterday, where many of us spend a lot of our time. It's not tomorrow, where the rest of us spend a lot of our time. It is right now in this moment. So the more we can win the day, the more we can endure the practice, the training, the mindset readiness, the faithfulness, serving as your brothers and sisters keepers, the more you can show up right now, fully engaged, completely all in, will not only allow you ultimately to win the future days to come, but win the day that you're living right now.
How did you turn this? I mean, tremendous. I mean, surviving is one thing. Thriving is another thing. How did you turn this life into something productive and something shareable, something inspiring? How did you turn that?
So I'm going to answer the question in a way you probably weren't expecting, but here it comes. When I 6 years ago now wrote our first book, which is called On Fire, the publishers sent me back the cover art, and there was a picture of John OLeary with his arms crossed, wearing a suit and tie, looking very smug and handsome at the camera, and I interpreted saying the words to the reader, look how awesome I am. And if I'm this awesome, why can't you be? So I immediately wrote them back and said, hey guys, why don't you read the book and then try to design the right cover for this book? Because this thing is not about me. It's not about me being awesome. This, in my mind, this is about a mighty God who still works miracles. This is about community that can still show up. This is about work that actually matters. This is about resiliency showed not only by one person, but by all of us. So they redid the cover art. When they sent it back to me, it was this blank cover, no picture of John on the front or the back, these bright gold letters that looks like fire, that spells out the word on fire, but it's made out of foil. And so when you look at it, Brett, you can actually see yourself in the reflection. And the whole idea was that in this book, in this story, in other words, those who encounter it will feel like they are seeing themselves in the journey. So when you ask the question, how did I do it? Man, I haven't done all that much by myself. I have been blessed mightily to have a roaringly awesome father and mother who guided me through a journey that I would have never done by myself. This incredible community that guided us through torturous treatment, but they kept showing up the following day and they kept doing it again. You can't pay someone enough money to do what they did every day. They did it out of a sense of mission and a calling to save a little boy's life. We received letters from Ronald Reagan and Nancy, letters coming in from Pope John Paul II. Trees were planted in Israel. While we were in hospital, it was a global movement. So they did it for me. Okay. They're the reason. They prayed this little guy forward. Once I came home, that's what we were working toward, man. Let's get out of here. Let's get out of this miserable place. Well, what I realized on day one is once the front door closed and my family and friends went away and the balloons started to pop and melt, my mother made dinner and I'm in a wheelchair. I got scars from my neck to my toes. I'm missing my fingers and my life is still in pain physically, which means emotionally as well. And the other problem that night is I had no ability to pick up the fork. So I have a sister who was just a servant. She still is. She's awesome. If she's listening, Amy, I love you. You're a role model. So Amy grabs this fork. She moves the potatoes toward my mouth. And right as she's about to feed me, Brett, my mother, my coach, looks at me, looks at Amy and says, Amy, drop the fork. If he's hungry, he's going to feed himself tonight.
Wow.
So we got some coaches in the room.
Okay. All right.
Some parents in the room.
Yeah.
This is called tough love, man. This is 2-a-days, maybe 10-a-days.
Oh, it's not tough love. It's what you needed to hear.
And it's what I needed to do.
Yes.
Because I was a victim to my circumstances. And I would have remained that way forever. And it's very easy to believe the words that people are speaking to us, that you're no good, that you'll never be enough. You'll never eat by yourself. That's for sure. You don't have fingers. You'll never go back to school. You'll never get a job. You'll never hold a girl's hand. This is all true at that point in my life. And then my mother steps in and says, if he's hungry, he'll feed himself. And the long story made far shorter for your listeners' enjoyment is 2.5 hours after this thing began, a little boy with tears in his eyes and ruining his cold meal has a fork sandwich between two hands and is feeding himself. And so that night, Brett, this little boy who never thought he would ever feed himself, fed himself his first dinner and has never looked back.
It's so funny, right? As parents, let's shift this for a minute. I'm a parent. You can probably hear my daughter's dog in the background. She just got in from Atlanta. We want our kids to have success and freedom. We want them as coaches. We want our kids to celebrate the joys that we know they could have, and yet we may cut them off at the knees before they ever have to fight for what's important for themselves. I mean, that had to be terrifying for your mother to sit there and not nurture her young boy in his probably greatest time of vulnerability because there's not a button to push. There's no nurse to come in that you've established relationships with that care for you. And now you're back home in a house that's probably not retrofit for you either. So, coaches, you hear that. There's tremendous love in that, but it's what you probably needed to hear more than anything else.
Man, it freed me.
Yeah.
It was, there are so many, I think you may have used the word earlier, inflection point. There are so many inflection points on my journey forward from the fire. One of the most liberating, though, was that night where she ruined dinner, where she caused her boy, man. I mean, you talk about pain. I don't know the kind of pain she endured. I don't know what it's like to sit next to the person you love more than anybody else in the world. I think you love all your kids evenly, but she loved this guy, at least the same as anybody in the world. She adored this child, and she is inflicting emotional harm into his world. And in doing so, inspiring this little boy eventually to realize you can do this. This is hard. Life's unfair. All right, exhale that. Now pick up the fork and eat. And then tomorrow we're going to work on shaking somebody's hand, even when they walk away. And the following day, John, it's piano. And the following day, we're getting you back onto the soccer field. And you are going to live a life again. You will not be a victim to your circumstances. Not in this house. And dude, let me tell you, in the marketplace where you and I are living and working in, there's a lot of that mindset that says I'm defined by my past negatively.
Yeah.
My life was unfair. My parents did a lousy job. The high school coaches did a horrible job getting me ready for college. Whatever the excuse is, my mother shattered that glass and said no more. That does not need to define the life that you're going to live going forward.
So well said. So well said. When you read The Choice, you're gonna see it. It's so good. And our listeners, I mean, listen, John's got great content online. His books are phenomenal. You listen to him, he'll move you. But it's not. The reason I wanted to ask you. So I believe that we have guides in our life.
Yeah.
Okay. And our guides, to me, one of the most powerful poems we have is, Footprints in the Sand, about walking through your hardest times. A young man looks at God and says, "Where were you during those times? I only see one set of footprints." And he said, "Oh, my young son, see, you've forgotten. Those are the times I carried you." Those are the times, but I believe we have guides. And you had a guide in your mom and your dad and your family who showed you different things, and they chose to see, but you chose to listen too.
Mm.
And I think sometimes in today's generation, we got to teach kids how to listen. We got to teach kids how to accept. We got to teach kids why. We can dish it out and break them, but can we build them back up? Can we teach them that the skill is to build themselves back up? When you're talking to sports teams, you got kids in college now. It's going to be unique with name, image, and likeness. These kids are going to be making more money than some of their coaches, and rightfully so. That's good. But a lot of them do come from some tough backgrounds and some tough circumstances. And that's a tough one, right? Because your circumstances, how much power do they have over you? How do you see that for you? I mean, here you are, you obviously your circumstances are what they are. You cannot go back and unwind the time. And I'm sure you would if you could.
Right.
How do we manage those circumstances in your opinion?
Dude, it's a great loaded question. And where my head went to next is you talked about great people who show up in your life. Well, one of my coaches was my grandfather. And I remember after September 11th, and some of your listeners may not even remember that day because they weren't born yet, but it changed the world in mighty ways. The market shut down. Manhattan certainly shut down. When the markets opened up, I think they opened up either on a Monday or Tuesday the following week. My grandfather and I had lunch that day at a little pasta company here in St. Louis, Missouri. And Grandpa, while nursing his noodles and iced tea, said to me, "Oh, by the way, I thought I'd let you know that today I made a large investment in two companies." And I majored in finance. Man, I knew all about the mistake of making a monetary investment when the markets open up after a global collapse like the one that was coming. We all knew it was coming. And so I said, "Grandpa, why'd you do that?" And he said, "Well, don't you even want to hear what companies I bought?" I said, "Not really." He goes, "I bought Boeing and I bought American Airlines." So on a day where everyone in their right mind knew that the markets were going to fall apart, everyone also knew that the organizations that would be hit hardest after 9/11 were airlines. And he's buying Boeing and he's buying American Airlines. So I say to him, "Grandpa, why'd you do it, man? I majored in finance. I'm 22. Why'd you do this? I know not to do this. You certainly should." And the wisdom of the ages, man, he looks back at me. He always was dressed impeccably. He looks back at me and says, "John, do you know why they called us the greatest generation?" So I'm like, "No." He goes, "Well, let me tell you. It wasn't because we survived the Great Depression. I think most of us would have tried to survive the Great Depression. It actually drew us together. It wasn't because when we saw evil overseas, we went off and we fought it and we lost brothers along the way. That's not why. And it wasn't because when we returned, we built the freest, best society to that point in the history of the world. That's not why they called us the greatest generation. The reason they called us that, John, is because along the way, through the Depression, through the war, and then afterwards, we never forgot what we learned along the way. We never forgot the values that the Great Depression taught us. We never forgot the lessons that the mighty war taught us. And we never forgot the opportunity to come together afterwards and build something bigger than ourselves." So when I hear you asking me about, John, talk about people who grew up in a tough neighborhood or had a difficult childhood or have been through some hardship. or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah, me too. I would remind those people that I can't imagine what you've gone through and what you're going through, but that doesn't have to negatively define who you become. That in fact, like the greatest generation before ours and like the one that's coming next, this hardship might be the very thing that sets you free. And in you becoming freed might be the very thing that sets forward the freedom of your younger brother, of your spouse, of your children, and of generations to come. So, man, I take this stuff very seriously. This is a very difficult subject because it's so divisive right now. But we've got to embrace where we are and our role in making it better, not only for ourselves as a coach, as a player, but as a citizen of our nation.
But we have to make the choice, and we all have the opportunity. One of the things that I've noticed in your field and my field, you don't do this, and this is what I love about listening to you, and I've studied you for a while, is if you talk to people in our field in the mental coaching or the speaking or the motivational, they'll tell you, sing a sad song, tell a story about misery that you've overcome. You've got it laid out there in front of you. Okay. I mean, you could pull on the heartstrings, but yours is all about not like, hey, I had this moment where I overcame. It's the things that you did every day. It's perspective. And it's interesting because we've conditioned our society, we've conditioned our players to victimize themselves into the wrongs that they always have. Tell me about a tough time in your life. Oh, well, a coach screwed me over.
Yeah.
Versus a tough time in your world is, there was a moment there when I doubted myself. We always want to externalize. We never want to internalize. And, to overcome our challenges, whatever we're in, I put up a tweet the other day about coaches. And I said, why is it that when coaches get fired, we see their authentic self? Like, where was that? And I got a couple direct messages of like, well, maybe they couldn't do it while they were coaching there. I'm like, well, it didn't help them. Maybe
Amen.
Maybe they should.
One of the greatest coaches I've ever met is a guy named Mike Matheny who coached the St. Louis Cardinals. Mike's heart is good. His knowledge is pure. His faithfulness is unquestionable. He is such a phenomenal leader of men and ladies and leaders. He's just a good leader. But the only time he truly revealed himself was after he got fired. He got fired as, I think, the winningest coach in St. Louis Cardinals history. He got fired as a guy who never had a less than 500 baseball season. Like, that's unheard of in baseball at that level. And he got fired. And then he lost his job. And this man and his heart and his humor and his faithfulness and his joy exuded in that exit interview with the media. And I believe and there's reasons why, and Mike's my brother. I love him. I've asked him about that. There's reasons why he held that close to the vest. But I would encourage every one of your coaches, don't hide your true self in the shadows. You wear your heart on the sleeve. And if people don't like it, move on. You will be far better at the junior high school level, serving well and impacting lives directly than you will be in a fraud at a collegiate level.
Yeah.
So you be who you are and watch what happens on the field around you.
How does that relate to, somebody like what you've been through with scars? Because I'm sure you have people looking at you. I did a podcast a couple years ago with J.R. Martinez, who was on Dancing with the Stars at American General Hospital. And he was a veteran from Shreveport, Louisiana, who was burned, and his face is, it's got the facial distortion and all that other stuff. And one thing about burn victims is it's noticeable. And there's really no way to cover it. I mean, our plastic surgery and our recovery is brilliant today, but still, there's not. You don't go back to. I mean, and I'm sure as a kid there were people who were looking. If you went somewhere, there were people who were watching, and it would have been easy to hide behind a shell there. How did you not do that?
So, you is the word that we keep having in interviews, obviously, because it's my story, if you will. But I didn't do it. My mother, again, my coach, really my first coach, is the reason why I'm able to be as assertive and optimistic as I am today. I remember there was an experience, Brett, in church. There's a time in our church setup where you turn around and shake hands with people around you, just a sign of peace. And so you typically begin with your family, and they go, you got a buddy in front of you, so you shake her hand or his hand. And then I remember as a 10-year-old boy turning around, shaking the hand of the guy behind me. Tall, bear of a man, had a beard, looked like a good guy. I extend my right fingerless hand. He extends his right hand. He's got a smile on his face. He looks down at my hand. He then pulls back his right hand, crosses his arms, and looks away. Okay, this is taking place in the holy confines of church, man.
The Catholic Church, I'm assuming.
Yeah.
Well, because when you said are you Catholic? No.
Yeah.
Peace be with you. Yes, I'm with you on that. I'm following as a raised Catholic.
Totally. And God be with you all, man. So like this guy that day broke this little boy's heart. And then afterwards, my mom is intuitive enough to pick up that something's wrong with John. So she, we're hemming and hawing on the way home, but eventually she gets it out of me that this man did that to me. And I remember, Brett, she turned around and she said to me, John, damn it. Do not ever be defined in your life by the way somebody else looks at you, treats you, or doesn't treat you. You are better than that. I'm raising you better than that. Here's this woman raising her voice at her 10-year-old boy whose heart was just broken by this big old bear of a man, reminding him, do not be defined by others. And so your question was, John, do you ever get stared at as a kid? All the time. John, do you ever get stared at as a man? All the time. How do you walk into a room with your scars on your sleeves? You can't hide from them, and you do so unapologetically. Well, man, I realize today I'm not defined by that. And not only that, in authentically, joyfully embracing my scars, what it does, it not only makes me more attractive, it actually makes people say, John, I've been through this. I was abused as a child. I went through a bankruptcy. My marriage is lousy. It's a fraud. I'm going through this with my team, with my players, whatever it is. So in being able to, in part, redeem your own scars, it also allows those who are dealing with their own tragedy, whatever that might be, at any level it might be, to come to you authentically and say, man, I want to learn more about how you've done it so I can do it myself.
It's interesting because, one of the hard things we see about the mental side, right, is we can't see those scars. We can't see the suffering. People will come to me and say, you've probably never heard this before. And I always say, don't ever tell that to a psychologist, because I have many times. Right. And we all worry that we're the outsider. And yet here you are in church, in a place of worship and acceptance, right? Turning, and somebody, the real scar was them. Yeah. Like they couldn't overcome that. Well, let's look at where we are now. My last question for you before we stop. We've come out. I'll say we've come out. We're continuing to emerge slowly, start-stops out of a COVID time. A lot of scars, a lot of traumas, a lot of devastation, a lot of distrust. Some accurate, some just because of the drama and the traumas that we're going through. What's our marching orders from John OLeary? How do we deal with this?
Well, I think Grandpa gave you the marching orders on September 18th, 2001, Greatest Generation. I think it's the call not only to read that beautiful book written maybe by Tom Brokaw or whoever wrote it years ago, but to recognize the call to become the next greatest generation, to redeem many of the social ills that are all around us and in part within us, whether that's around racism or injustice or inequality or challenges in your marriage or decisions on how you want to remain victimized because of your childhood, whatever it is. You are called on this day and on every day to wake up from those excuses and to become the best version of yourself. And when we do that en masse, we begin to become the next greatest generation. So let me give folks just a couple ways that they can do exactly that. The first would be every morning to wake up earlier than you need to in reflection or prayer, and certainly gratitude. If you don't have a grateful heart, it's very hard to find joy in your life. And resiliency, I think, is a byproduct of joy. And for an athlete, a coach, a spectator in the stands watching the Cardinals lose last night, you need a lot of resiliency. So the way you grow in that is to tap into your faithfulness, tap into reflectfulness and mindfulness and gratitude. That's number one. The second is to design a personal mission statement. So if people have never done this, you can. And it is as difficult and as awesome as asking the question, why do you choose to do what you do at a high level? Why do you want to become the greatest running back in Alabama's history or whatever it might be? Why do you choose to thrive? And in answering that, you become clear on your true north. And it should be about something far more than a position or a season. So my purpose statement is I choose to thrive today because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. No excuses. Like I'm really, because man, I'm in pain right now physically. My life is not easy, but it is good. I got a lot of joy. Why? Because I choose to thrive. Why? Because I made the choice. I'm clear on it. Because God demands it. My family deserves it. The world is starved for it. Let's roll. Language from 9/11. Let's go. Let's go. So that's the second piece. And the third, man, I believe in the power of doing better every day. So if you ran a certain speed yesterday and you're 40, how do you get better tomorrow? In the following day, If you were a pretty good spouse yesterday, how do you get better today and tomorrow and the next day? Whatever the role might be, how do you continually improve? And the best, most succinct way I've ever figured out myself to get better is to ask the question nightly, intentionally in a journal, what more can I do? So I've been asking this for the last 8 years. I know you know the originator of that question because you heard me speak in Nashville. But Jack Buck taught me, Jack Buck, the great announcer for the St. Louis Cardinals, the power of getting better. What more can I do? And so I've been doing this for 8 years because of that. Our business is growing. My faithfulness is growing. My marriage is better. I'm a far better son to my mom and my dad. Hopefully, I'm a better guest on your podcast. I'm a better dad to my kids, better human being, a better American. I'm also more certain of things I don't know. I used to be pretty doggone convicted politically. Man, I'm just trying to listen and learn. I used to be so sure of myself, and now I'm just trying to sit back and ask a lot more questions. So I'm getting a lot better, doctor, because I'm committed to improving tomorrow and making it better than yesterday.
John, thank you for being a guide in our life. I watched the way that people came up to you afterwards, and I know when I see authenticity, it's not what's said on stage; it's what's said when nobody's watching. And I watched it, and thank you for making our life better and inspiring me. And just like you said, I mean, we all deserve. My family deserves it. And the world needs it. So keep sharing that message, and our paths will cross soon. So thank you.